What's going on, creative family? It's Dustin Valkema and welcome back to another video. Today is all about the gateway to the soul and how to make eyes pop in Photoshop fairly quickly. So if you guys want a free action, I've linked one in the description here below, and that's basically going to cover some of the adjustment layers that we're talking about here in the video. And yeah, if you guys like what you see, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in Photoshop. Alright guys, here we are in Photoshop taking a look at how we can make these eyes pop in a fairly quick and non-destructive method. We have two different images here. We have this more typical studio shot as well as a backlit shot that we will deal with, and I treat them both very similar but different, and so I'll show you how I work with those in either case. Now before we get started here, let's go ahead and do a quick markup so that we can see exactly what we'll be discussing here in the tutorial. And that primarily has to do with evening out any of the retinal veins or discoloration here that you have in the sclera. And so we'll take care of these, popping the catch lights, adding light and some kind of depth there to the iris, as well as maybe darkening the eyebrows here, a little bit in the upper eyelid on this side here, and then the lower eyelid here. And we'll also probably go in and enhance some of the makeup and mascara that she's wearing. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get to the adjustments here. What we'll do is we'll focus on the sclera first and making sure that we can even that out. And the process that I typically use for that is simply adding a channel mixer adjustment layer, setting this to monochrome, and then setting it to a screen blend mode. And what I'll do at this point is generally press Control or Command I to invert the layer mask here. So with this adjustment layer in place and our mask set, what I'll generally do is take this down to around 70% opacity so that we're not brightening the sclera too far, which will often give it a very unrealistic look, because you can see here that it's already giving quite a bit of luminance there that we may not desire. So if you need to, you can just drop that a little bit further, but it definitely helps even out some of the values there that are happening. So what we'll do next here is add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And the reason that we're going to use this adjustment layer is primarily to get rid of some of the redness that's happening in the retinal veins here, as well as the yellow discoloration that's going on in the sclera. So we can head down in this hue sat adjustment layer and go to our red channel, and we can crank that saturation. I generally ballpark this quite a bit, and we'll say -60 for saturation, and then I will bring my lightness all the way up to 100, and that would just lessen the effect or the prominence of the red there. And then I will head into my yellows here, and then I will do the same thing, but we'll say take this down to a -50, and then lightness we can say 75. It's very ballpark. You may need to do something a little bit different. You can see here that that's really taking care of most of the image there. But what we can do is press Control or Command I on this adjustment layer here and invert that. And then we can grab a brush, and this time we'll knock our opacity down quite a bit. So we'll say 30% opacity and pen pressure sensitivity on. And then we can use this here with a white brush on that inverted layer mask to go in and paint out some of these areas that are quite a bit discolored. We can do that on both sides. And in this case, you can see that we do have some cyans there in the sclera, so we can head and do our hue saturation adjustment layer and just desaturate those tones just a little bit for the cyan colors that are there. So we can see here that what we did in a fairly quick method is has gone ahead and just evened out these scleras quite a bit and popped them just a little bit more without making them look too fake. And we can, like I said before, you can just drop your opacity of these layers if you need to in order to bring back a little bit more realism if you'd like. What we can do here for organization's sake as we move forward is just press Control or Command G to group these two layers of adjustments that we've created and just name that sclera. And at this point, we'll focus now on adding a bit of dimension here to the iris and the catch light. So my process for these adjustments is typically to add a curves adjustment layer. And what I'm looking to do with this adjustment layer is raise these values here, or the white point, all the way up to a point to where I can get clear visibility on the iris, but I'm not clipping any of the values. And by clipping of those values there in the iris, I mean blowing them out here like the rest of the face to like a, say, 255 white. We don't want anything that high. When we start to build up this effect, we can get some really cool detail there in the iris. And so this will work fine for us here. And we can press Control or Command I to invert the layer mask there with it selected. And we can rename this layer to Iris. Now all we have to do is grab our brush tool with we'll say a 30% opacity and pen pressure sensitivity on. Depending on the detail of your image or what your final deliverable may be, you might need to work at a lower opacity and build it up a little bit more. I generally like to take broad strokes and then, work with what I need after that. And so what we can do here is just begin to paint with this white brush on this adjustment layer and really make these irises pop. So the general rule is you head opposite of the catch light. So if we have our catch light, let's go to a markup here. I'll say bring my opacity back up. So generally speaking, if I have, I'll just say red for now. If I have my catch light here and my light direction is this way, then the light on our iris will be here. And vice versa, it may be different. So just know that the highlighting of the iris is always going to be opposite of your catch light. So wherever that is, I would say never to head up into this range and put a highlight here, unless for some reason your catch light's down here, which would quite often look awkward or ominous, depending on whatever your image looks like. You just want to make sure that you stay on the opposite side there. So back to our layer mask here. I think at this point we have a fairly decent buildup of light. Now, if you see yourself starting to get a little bit too much value here in the pupil as you're painting these on, we can kind of push that a little bit just to accentuate it and show you. If you start to get that, what you can do is just head into this curves layer and then just take this black point here and kind of push that in just a little bit. Now it will add a little bit of saturation here, to the adjustments that you've made for the iris, which is fine. You can just go ahead and pull this white point just down a little bit, and where you're still getting that nice light, but it doesn't start to push those values too hard. So with this iris pop here and the light that we've added, we've gone a bit extreme in this case, which is okay. If we hit a point to where we get a little bit too saturated, what we can do is just head in and we'll place a vibrance adjustment layer there, and we can press Alt or Option and click in between these two layers, between the iris adjustment and the vibrance layer. And what that will do is just create a clipping mask so that whatever adjustments we make here with this vibrance are directly impacting just the iris adjustments. And so with this vibrance slider, we can tweak that, up or down depending on what we need. And same with the saturation. If we want, more saturation for any type of crazy psychedelic look, we can add that, or we can pull that saturation down just a little bit and work with that as well. I think I'm quite happy here with where it's at, so I won't really worry about that too much. It doesn't do a whole lot for me at this point. All right, now what we'll look to do next is add a little bit more dimension to the eye shape and the makeup itself. And most of the time, what I'd like to do is work with a curves adjustment layer set to hard light, and I'll show you that here in a moment. So we'll create a new curves adjustment layer, and we can set this to hard light. And you can see that, between, say, hard light and overlay, there isn't too much of a breakup, but I do like the effects that I get with hard light once I start to adjust these curve values a little bit. And so what we'll do is we'll take the white point of the curves here, and we can just drag that straight down some. And then we can bring these black points up and down to get a pretty decent result. And what I'm looking to do is more or less underexpose the image without losing too much of the detail that's there. And so this way it gives me a really nice representation without, say, all of the funkiness that's happening here on this overlay blend mode. This is primarily why I like to use hard light. And now if I switch back to hard light, you can see that it's evens that out quite a bit more and just gives us a nice look overall. And so at this point, we can just head to that layer mask and press Control or Command I to invert that. And the same process as just about everything else we've done. We will just use our pen tool, or sorry, not our pen tool, our brush tool, with just a white color here as a foreground color, and then pen pressure sensitivity on with about 30%. And we can begin to paint right on the, we'll say, the upper eyelid here, so that we can just accentuate the makeup that's happening here in the mascara. And we can do the lower eyelid as well. You can just go through here and paint this. I will just adjust, we'll say maybe 60% for my opacity, so that hopefully we can rough this a little bit faster. And what I'll do is I'll just go through, a lot of times I will get down a little bit trickier and I will actually paint in closer to the strands of the eyelashes here on the bottom lid. And the top lid really doesn't need it because they look quite good the way that they are. So on this side, we can do the same thing, just follow along the lower lid there. And then we can just paint in a few of those strands to help them out and look a little bit more full and thick. So you can see here what that did is it just added a little bit more depth just to her makeup. But what I can do now is work with a slightly larger brush, head back down to about 30% opacity. And then I can just use this to paint on her eyebrows to make those just a little bit more prominent, a little bit darker. And similar to the contouring that I may do normally, I will just work on really accentuating the smoky lid look here. So we can just darken some of this, some of these values here right on the eyelids. Really help to push those a little bit. So at this point, what this has done, if we just go ahead and group this entire set of adjustments, and we can call this eye adjust. Now, if we turn these off and on, you can see the bits of pop and dimension that we added to that. Now, again, this is fairly heavy-handed, depending on what you like and your preference of style for your images. I, most of the time, actually will go with this kind of look and maybe tone it down just a little bit. But overall, I like to have a lot of, drama and more of an artistic approach. And I actually use this method here for both male and female models or subjects. Most of the time for males, I just tone it down a little bit because it's, clearly in most cases, they won't have the amount of makeup that females have, or they have a different style of, drama to their eyes, and they don't need so many adjustments. but especially with the adjustments that we're working on here with the iris, that's a pretty universal approach that I might use to almost all of my work. And yeah, I just like the look that it gives. So what we can do here now is take a look at a backlit shot and how I might go about adding, some kind of drama here to the eyes. The rest of the image is fairly low key, just backlit in nature, but you do have quite a bit going on to where we actually lose the eyes quite a bit. So when I shot this, I had really one or two options, and that was to leave her face, and the front portion of her body here shadowed, or I could just bring that exposure up just a little bit in recovery and try to make something out of it this way. I like both art styles, just straight silhouette and this style here. So I decided to go with this one. And what I would do here, especially in like a sci-fi scene like this, is just add a curves adjustment layer similar to how we did with the other one. And I could also probably get away with just painting this on with a brush, but I like to work non-destructively and see what I did just in case my client needs me to go back and make adjustments. And so we can bring these up here, and you can see that there is a little bit of detail there in the iris. But what we can do is go ahead and just press Control or Command I on that layer mask. And then with a white brush, very much how we did with the other image, is go ahead here and paint in the irises. Now, normally I do like to have a nice fall off to the side here. So I will take the time and make sure that I have, quite a bit of value range here from one end of this curve to the other. And yeah, I just like to make sure that there's plenty of information there. So what we can do here is also head into the catch lights, which you can see me there. Kudos to myself being all ninja. And we'll just pop these out just a little bit. Now I do like the effect that, catch lights bring. You can see immediately here how that really pops those eyes. Now that may not be physically accurate or correct to what would be happening in this scene right now, but I really don't care because I like the way that it looks. So this is a look that I like to use often. Hopefully you guys enjoy it, or can implement this type of stuff into your work if you're not currently, or just find another way to do it if you use it already. So with this curves adjustment layer here, just popping the light in these irises, let's say now I would like to add some color to make this all stand out even further with some type of a hue, in which case I think in my original work for this piece, I chose like an orange, like that fire orange. And so what we can do is head down and grab a, solid color adjustment layer, and we can bring some orange into this. I think what I did is I set it to overlay or soft light. No, I think it was overlay. And then I pressed Alt or Option and then clicked in between these two layers here again to create a clipping mask. And so what this did here was just gave some color and a hue to my irises there. And I went into the layer mask for that solid color adjustment and used a black brush, and I painted out, you can just turn up our opacity there. I painted out these catch lights so that I wasn't having too much there. Now, in this case, this is fairly unrealistic with the way that I would be, painting out the color of the catch lights. It was just an artistic preference at the time. But I like the way that it turned out. And then I also added another curves layer. And this is really to brighten and accentuate more of a hot pop or bit of detail here in the irises. You can see where it's starting to break the noise there and blow out a few pixels. And so what I did here is just left that out and not really in the clipping mask stack here for the original adjustment. And I pressed Control or Command I to invert that layer mask. And then with a white brush, bring my opacity back down. And then with a white brush, I just went through and painted a little bit more of a hot detail here in the irises. So it gives us just a little bit more of a breakup, but still leads it to be a very mysterious eye. It's quite dramatic. Now, with these layers done, we can name this. We can say iris pop and iris hue. And then we can say iris dodge. And that will be primarily what we've been doing here. So we added the pop initial, or the initial pop there to add some light to it. We added a hue with the overlay blend mode, which also helped amplify or intensify the light that was going on. And then the iris dodge was really to add kind of a nice highlight and glow to the catch lights there. Now, if we did want to add a little bit more color per se, or not necessarily a color, sorry, but more of a lightness to the sclera here, we can just go in and grab a curves adjustment layer, and we can just bring these midtones up a little bit. Don't need to be too far. And press Control or Command I to invert the layer mask. And then with a white brush, we can go again and paint these in here, just to add just a little bit more of a value detail there, but it doesn't need to be very high. I think that in something like this, I may even drop that to a 50% or just get rid of that altogether. I think that works out fine, but it adds a little bit of definition there to the eyes, but they're still very dark and mysterious without bringing too much attention to them aside of the irises that we'd normally want to see. Alright guys, so that wraps up this tutorial on how to make eyes pop in Photoshop. Thank you so much for being here and checking it out. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and click that bell icon so that you get notified as I upload new content. As always guys, just stay creative, create more, say less, and keep moving forward. See you guys in the next video.